Today's video we'll be looking at the S3 Virge GX2, the final and most powerful Virge 3D accelerator card.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the toys. Get ancient electronics, we cover it all.
So, in 2024, there's a lot of information out there on old video cards, but one of the cards that seems to be overlooked is the Virge GX2, which is actually the final revision of the infamous Virge 3D accelerator, or as many people refer to it, decelerator card. And it's kind of interesting because the Virge is kind of, well, as I said, it's kind of infamous, but I don't know if I'd call it iconic, but it is sort of a staple of retro computing. It's a very common card, a lot of games supported, like the S3 API, and it's just kind of strange that there's not really any comprehensive videos, or people just don't really talk about the Virge GX2, which is the final and most powerful of the Virge cards. And I've been wanting to actually do this video for quite some time now. Now recently, Phil from Phil's Computer Lab, it's another larger channel that covers retro computing things, and he's been covering, over time, he's been kind of covering the Virge cards. He does a lot of videos looking at older sound and video cards, and he's covered the original Virge. I think he's done a couple videos on the original Virge, and then the Virge DX/GX. His latest video, I believe it was on the Virge DX, he announced he is planning to do a video coming up on the Virge GX2. And that kind of kicked me in the butt and kind of motivated me to get this video out there. And if I do get this video out before Phil, maybe I'll know how Roger Corman felt in 1993. And for those of you that don't get that reference, Roger Corman was a producer best known for his kind of schlocky monster movies and things like this, post-apocalyptic movies in the 80s, you know, cheaply made in the Philippines, very kind of schlocky, B-rated stuff. Anyways, the story is, when he caught wind of Steven Spielberg coming out with Jurassic Park, he wanted to make his own dinosaur movie and actually beat Steven Spielberg to the punch. What we got was this gem right here, Carnosaur. Obviously, nothing like Jurassic Park, and as we all know, Jurassic Park went on to be a big hit and a film classic. Carnosaur, not so much. Kind of a, maybe you could call it a cult hit, maybe. I don't know, it has Ron Howard in it. It has a couple sequels, but yeah, he actually did beat Spielberg to the punch by a few weeks, I believe. So before we look at this card, just a very, very brief overview. The Virge cards started with this guy here. This is one of the original Virge cards, and these are early sort of 3D accelerator cards. A lot of people joke and call them decelerator cards because a lot of times the games actually seem to run slower with these cards installed than software mode. There's a lot of videos out there and a lot of comparison videos and whatnot. The funny thing about the Virge is it actually has, I think other than the Voodoo cards and the Glide standard, S3D, which is kind of these Virge cards like proprietary API that games support, it has the most support. A lot of games actually directly support this card, either in the retail version or the patches came out that support these Virge cards. This is the original Virge. And then next they came out with something like this guy here. This is the Virge DX. There's also a GX, but the thing with these cards is they were a little bit faster. I believe they usually have more memory stock on them. But it was an incremental increase in speed. These aren't much faster than the original Virge. And they also broke compatibilities. Now what I mean by that is the bulk of the games that support the Virge API, the S3D API, kind of directly supported this original guy, and I don't know, there was some kind of revision in the Virge DX GX that broke that. So even if you have a game that supports the Virge 3D acceleration, it probably won't work straight out of the box with this guy, a DX or GX, and you need to do various things, or you need to run a wrapper, which is like a program that sort of, I don't know, kind of like patches it on the fly or makes the program think that the DX is an original Virge, something like that. Don't know how it technically works, but It's a pain to get games working on anything other than the original Verge. You can get them working, and I believe like maybe all but one or two you can make work, but as we'll see in this video, it's a pain in the butt. I have to interject here and do say throughout this video I kind of use the DX, GX versions of the S3 Virge kind of interchangeably. The reality of it is they are extremely similar cards, but I guess you could think of the DX as sort of a budget version of the GX. I believe the GX did come in AGP and PCI form, and it did something a little bit different with the memory. I believe the GX used asynchronous memory, and it was overall it was a little bit faster than the DX, although nothing super significant. Lastly, the focus of this video is the Virge GX2. Now, as you can tell, this is an AGP card. I believe this is one of the earliest AGP cards. This card in particular has VGA, S-Video, and Composite. And again, this card was an increase in speed and performance over the DX GX. How much? Well, I don't really know, but it definitely is the fastest of the Virge cards. Problem is, it breaks compatibility again, not by much. And what I mean by that is to get this card working, you basically have to do the same little tricks and stuff to get this card working, but in some circumstances it's even a little tiny bit worse. But the thing is, of the Virge cards in the Virge family, this card is the only one supposedly fast enough to run a lot of those S3D games properly. Although it does supposedly introduce glitches, so even games you can get running on a DX GX fine may have some little graphical glitches on the GX2. So that's kind of the irony there, that this card is supposedly the only card that will run a lot of these S3D games suitably, but it also introduces the most issues with getting the game to run, or it introduces graphical glitches. So you can't win. It's either you're using something like this that's really compatible and easy to work with the S3D games, but it's far too slow, or you've got something like this that will finally kind of run the game at an acceptable frame rate, but it introduces a lot of headache and graphical glitches. So I guess you could say the DX GX is kind of the middle ground, but really the focus of the video is this. So we're really going to look at several games. I'm actually not looking so much for speed differences or frame rate differences, although we will look at that. I'm actually seeing if we can find some of those little graphical glitches or issues this card introduces. That's what I'm most interested in. So we're not going to be really looking at this card at all. We're mostly going to be comparing the GX2 and this S3 Virge DX. And I'd also like to say that all three of these cards actually make excellent cards for MS-DOS, even if you're not using the 3D capabilities. They are all excellent at 2D. So they all have excellent 2D cores. So in 2D and DOS, these cards are all great. I believe they all have the same core as this card right here that uses the Trio 64, which is a really good 2D card. So these all make excellent choices for MS-DOS, even if you're not using the 3D capabilities of these cards. They're all very good for 2D applications in DOS. And they're pretty fast, not as fast as some other 2D cards, but they're pretty fast. You really can't go wrong with these cards in MS-DOS. The one thing is, depending on the card, some of them I believe don't really give the correct black levels. The color black it displays is a little bit lighter, or almost like a grayish. I don't know why it doesn't bother me that much, but it's something to consider that some of these cards do seem to have that issue. Before we move on, one more thing. There are actually a few cards that came after the GX2. I believe there's the MX, which is sort of a low power version of the GX2, and I believe there's also the Trio 3D, which is kind of a rebranding of the Virge name for business applications. They tweaked the core a little bit, they added some features, but it's a little bit slower. So even though those cards kind of came after the GX2, and maybe they're not technically, or at least the Trio 3D isn't technically a Virge card, they are slower than the GX2. So the GX2 might not be the last of the Virge cards, but it is the fastest. For running all these games, I'm going to be using a mostly period correct build for this, as I usually like to do. So something around the year 1997 because of the GX2. Now, perfect for this project would have been my Ultimate Year 1997 machine with DOS and Windows 95, and this is indeed the case I used. You see, the old floppy drive died, and I just replaced it. I only have one with a black bezel. Unfortunately, the motherboard that I originally had in that machine, the keyboard stopped responding. So I ended up putting in something a little bit newer. It's the same parts. I've still got the A64 Gold. Took out the Riva, of course, for the testing. Still have the Pentium 3 300 megahertz. I think 128 megabytes of memory. All the same stuff in there, although the board is different. I'm using an Asus P38F, I think, or is that P3BF? Anyways, it uses a newer, I think it's a 440BX chipset from like 1998 or 99. So the motherboard's newer, but it's more or less still a 1997 machine. I don't think the performance is going to be that different. So here is my post screen. So a lot of YouTubers, when they're reviewing video cards, they like to use overpowered systems because they like to eliminate any bottlenecks. I like to use like period or error correct hardware. I just like to see how the card operated in its time, in a system from that time overall. I'm not using anything to speed the card up or anything. I am using the S3, the VESA update to update the VESA to 2.0, but that's about it. So looking here at our standard round of DOS benchmarks, of course all these benchmarks were done 3 times and the average was taken, but there's nothing really exciting going on here. 3D Bench 1.0C, the difference was negligible, less than 1 point. PCP Bench and Quake, both running at 640 by 480, had the exact same scores on both the DX and the GX2. The only benchmark here that gave a real difference was Doom running at max settings. We got a little bit of a better score with the GX. We had 76.5 with the DX, and then we had 79.4 with the GX2, which is a few FPS difference there. So that is something, but overall, in these simple benchmarks, I didn't see a whole lot of difference in speed between the two cards. If you are interested in looking at some more DOS benchmarks that has to do with the Verge GX2 and all the Verges for that matter, check out Vintage 3D website. A lot of good information on that website, including on the Verge 2 and multiple GX2 and multiple benchmark results. Now, one game I wanted to test, and I always like to test for scrolling issues, is Commander Keen 4. And as you can see here, it's running on the Verge DX, and there's no scrolling issues whatsoever. It plays and displays just fine. No jittery scrolling or anything like that. And here we have Keen 4 running on the Verge GX2. Again, same situation, no scrolling issues, no jitteriness, no display issues that I could detect. Alright, before we get into the S3D titles, just a shout out to Control-Alt-Reese and his website here. Lots of great information on how to get these games running on a DX and a GX and a GX2 for that matter, as well as download links and links to patches and things like that. A lot of great information. This would have been extremely difficult without this page that he put together. Alright, so now let's test some S3D games. The first ones we're going to test here in DOS, and the first one we're going to go with is Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider was actually pretty easy to get running on both the DX and the GX2. All you have to do is replace the tomb.exe with a patched tomb.exe. You just overwrite one file with the other, and it seems to work just fine. I believe there's an expansion to the first Tomb Raider called Unfinished Business, and that has the patch included with it. But if you have the original like me, you just overwrite tomb.exe with the patched one. Now, it was perfectly playable on both the GX2 and the DX. I didn't have a frame counter or anything, so it's just, I'm kind of eyeballing it. It did seem a little smoother on the GX2, but both versions I felt were quite playable without too much issue. The only issue I came across, which I think's particular maybe to my setup, is on the DX for whatever reason, when Laura would talk, she sounded like slowed down. She kind of sounded like Katharine Hepburn or something.
This used to be the ballroom, but I've converted it into my own personal gym.
I put in the GX2, and the problem went away. She sounded normal. Just to test this, I pulled the GX2, put the DX back in, and her voice sounded weird and elderly-ish again. So, not sure what was going on there. It seems particular to my setup, though. You might notice here with the footage also that the output from the GX2 was much brighter. I didn't adjust any settings, I didn't change anything with my capture device. All I did is a straight swap of the video cards. But yeah, the output on the GX2 definitely is brighter. Next up is Whiplash. This is another S3D DOS racing title. This wasn't too hard at all to get running on the either card. I did have to use the S3D wrapper program though to get it to detect the Verge, the DX, and the GX2. But other than that, worked fine. Now this game you do need to have, there was like a special OEM version. There's like a regular version release that we're looking at now, and then there's this one that has the S3D support, and you can tell the CD is Whiplash 3D. And that's the one that has the support for the Verge cards. So again, I had to use a wrapper, but both versions seem to work fine. It was hard for me to really see a difference between the two versions, but yeah, they both played fine. They were both quite playable. I should also point out here that these aren't running in different resolutions. I just did a poor job. I wasn't really thinking ahead when I recorded the footage for each of these, and I was playing around with the different like view angles and stuff, and I didn't get it the same for both. So it's just zoomed out more on the GX2, and it zoomed in more on the DX, but they're not running in different resolutions. So next we have Terminal Velocity, and the version I installed was the retail version. It was version 1.2, and I was particularly interested in this game because on the GX2 supposedly there are flashing textures. Now this game was a pain in the butt to get working. I had to use the wrapper, but even using the wrapper I was getting errors. It would not start the game. Finally, at least in my situation, I had to use the wrapper but not run the EXE for the game. And by the way, you have to patch this game as well for S3D. I had to run the wrapper on the setup program, set up the sound card, and then go to the option that was like save and launch Terminal Velocity. That got me into the game, but just running the wrapper on like the EXE files, either the game or the TV file that's supposed to be the game itself, that wouldn't work. If you don't use the wrapper and you patch the game and you try to run it with a DX or a GX or a GX2, you'll get a Verge not found error. You'll get that with a lot of these games when you're using if you don't use a wrapper and you're not using the original Verge. Anyways, the games, both of them were quite playable. This game does have a built-in like frame rate, what's the word I'm looking for? Frame rate counter. You can put in a command, I forget what it is. So playing on the DX, it was hovering generally around 14 FPS. And I did see a difference on the GX2. It was hovering more around 19 FPS. So about a 5 FPS difference between the two cards. So a little bit smoother experience on the GX2. I did not see the flashing textures anywhere when using the GX2. The game's pretty much played the same except for a slightly better frame rate with the GX2. So I don't know what's going on there. I did notice on both cards there was kind of an issue when you blow up something, whether it be a plane or a tree or a base. There'd be like a very light sort of white rectangle around the object that was blown up. It wasn't too distracting, actually. It wasn't too bad. But other than that, I didn't see the flashing texture issues with the DX2. I tried a bunch of different levels, and I just didn't see the flashing textures. So I would definitely play it on the GX2 rather than the DX, just because you get a little bit of a frame rate boost. But I didn't see the incompatibility issues supposedly you're supposed to get with the DX2. GX2, excuse me. Moving on to Windows games, this is Descent to the Infinite Abyss. Now this is a DOS and Windows game, and this game was another giant pain to get working with the DX or the GX2. This Infinite Abyss version of Descent 2, I think it's like a later release that adds some levels, and it directly adds S3D support. If you're working with an earlier version of Descent 2 that's not the Infinite Abyss version, there is a patch you can use. So yeah, this game was difficult to run, as in it would not run under DOS, despite being the DOS version. So the only way I was able to get this game to run is by using, not only just using the wrapper, but I had to run it under Windows, and I did use Windows 95, and I had to use it under the Windows DOS prompt, and then using the wrapper it would work. I have no idea why it doesn't work in pure DOS, but it did work under the Windows like DOS prompt. So yeah, I know I'm not the only one that had this issue with it, because again, Control-Alt-Reese, when he did his when he looked at all the S3D accelerated games, and he used a Verge DX, and he had the same exact issue. It wouldn't work under him unless it was under the Windows DOS prompt. Anyways, thankfully this game also has a FPS counter, and I have it running there. And yeah, there was a little bit of a speed difference between the GX2 and the DX. No graphical anomalies or anything weird. Both versions ran fine. And yeah, there's also a little demo that you can run with the game with the FPS counter. So we'll do that here, and we can compare the speeds between the two cards. And before we move on, I just wanted to point out with this Descent 2, the software mode is actually much faster. At least on my 300 megahertz Pentium 2, software mode is much, much faster than either the DX or the GX2 by like a lot. Maybe, 20 average on the GX2 and maybe almost 100 or 90 average on the software mode. So quite a difference. And last but definitely not least, we have MechWarrior 2. The version I have is just like the boring, I think it's a budget version, so I had to find and acquire the special S3D version on the internet and installed that version with the S3D compatibility. Now this one isn't too hard to get working, but you do have to find like a DLL file from the wrapper, and then you put it in the game directory of the MechWarrior 2, and that will allow cards like the DX, the GX, and the GX2 to work. I believe they will run without the DLL, but you won't have textures. So this is one of those games that I've been told over and over and over again that it will only run acceptably on a GX2, as in the frame rate will only be acceptable on a GX2. I played it on both. You'll see I had issues with the GX2 in a minute, but anyways, on the DX, I thought it was fine. I mean, it wasn't the smoothest, wonderful experience, but I thought it was playable. It looked okay. I didn't really have any issues with it. Now, I didn't play hours into the game. I didn't play on a battlefield with like 10 other mechs and helicopters and causing all kind of slowdown. So maybe later, like more busy portions of the game, it really benefits from the GX2. But for the little bit I did play, I didn't really have a problem playing it on the DX. Now, when I went to the GX2, I didn't really give the GX2, I can't say I gave it a fair shot, or not a fair shot, but I really can't speak to the improved frame rates of the GX2 version, because when I did try to run the GX2 version, I got no textures. Now, I suspect this is because there's enough difference even between the DX and the GX2 that you have to find, if you're running a GX2, I would have had to hunt down a different DLL. I know it works. You can get it to work. But at this point, I was just kind of done playing around with these S3D games, and I was tired. And I didn't bother to hunt down the DLL that would be compatible with the GX2. Again, with this video, I wasn't so super concerned with the speed difference. We kind of figure that the GX2 is going to be a little bit faster. I was more interested in like graphical issues and compatibility issues. And even though you can certainly get the GX2 working with MechWarrior 2, I've seen it done by many people. There is a little bit more. You can't, on not every game, you can just use the same method that worked on the DX. There is a little bit of a difference there. So, yeah, that was my experience with MechWarrior 2.
Image engaged.
Alright, so we're going to look at a little bonus game here. We're going to look at Havoc. Now, Havoc is a little interesting because on anything faster than the 300 MHz Pentium 2, if you're running software mode, it runs a little bit fast. So, like I said, 300 MHz Pentium 2 is about the correct speed, and you can run it in software mode. But let's say you've got a newer machine, you want to run Havoc on your 1 GHz Pentium 3 or something like that. It will run too fast if you use the DirectX software mode, but if you run it on a Verge will actually slow it down to the correct speed in the S3D mode. So this here is a little bit of Havoc running at the correct speed in S3D mode on my Verge DX. So that was our look at the S3 Virge GX2, the most powerful of the Verge cards. What was my opinion of it? I mean, personally, it's just more trouble than it's worth. Now, here's a quote from Vets. He's a Vogons user, and he did a lot of research several years back on and comparing like retro vintage 3D accelerator cards. So he seems to know a bit about all these old vintage cards, and this is what he had to say about this card. So I would read this quote for you, but unfortunately I've been informed that I cannot. So there's like an unwritten rule on YouTube that you can't really read a quote that you post in your own videos. You have to have another content creator that covers kind of the same content that you do read those quotes. So without further ado, here is Tyler from Definitely Casual PCs. Check out his channel when you get a chance. And take it away.
The GX2 is generally very compatible. On top of my head, I can only think of Battle Race, which won't run, and Terminal Velocity, which gives glitches. Other than that, it provides much better frame rates than other cards, and thus can be considered the only card actually viable to play most of the S3D titles.
Now, do I agree with that statement of his? I don't know. The thing is, there's some weird anomalies here. So, first of all, when I used my GX2, in a lot of tests, it definitely was faster. Was it light years faster? No, but it was faster to the point that you could tell a difference. The difference seemed to matter. So that's good for it. But were the games unplayable on the GX/DX, or specifically the DX card I used? And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I played Mech Warrior, and although I didn't get like deep into the game, and I didn't get like into the later levels where there's a ton going on, it seemed perfectly playable to me. So I don't really see why you would definitely need a GX2 to get any enjoyment out of that game. It seemed playable to me on a DX. Let me know if I'm wrong on that. Maybe I didn't play later levels where there's more going on, but to me the game seemed fairly playable. Now, in my efforts, I didn't get the GX2 working with Mech Warrior, but, you know, I'm sure with a little bit more effort I could have, and I'm sure it would have increased the frame rate some, but like I said, it still seemed playable on the DX to me, unless you're like a real snob on like frame rates. I mean, I don't know. I didn't see the flashing textures issue in terminal velocity that you were supposed to get with the GX2. I don't know what's going on there. Phil, if you're watching this video and it's before your video on the GX2 came out, take a look at that issue. Maybe you can clear that up for us. Maybe you can find where the flashing textures are, because I didn't see them. And I played the game a lot more than we've seen in this video. I went and I looked, I played a bit of like all the later levels too that you can choose, and I didn't see any flashing textures. I had the same issues with the GX2 as I did with the DX card. So I don't know. I guess I don't know. I just didn't come across the issue. So that most of that headache you have to go through to get the DX/GX working and using wrappers and all kind of things, those same steps you'll have to do with the GX2 anyway. So I guess you may as well have a GX2 and get the extra frame rates. Although these seem to be a bit more uncommon than the DX/GXs and probably a little bit more expensive. So, I mean, is it worth the extra money for a GX2? And a couple of those S3D games, I don't know. That's up to you. So that was just kind of our quick look at the Virge GX2. So let me know what you guys think. What do you think about the Virge cards in general? Are they even worth it? Are playing the games in S3D even worth it with these cards? What's your experience with them? What's your experience with the GX2? What do you think? So let me know in the comments. I always like reading your comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you later. And before I sign off here, a special thanks to Tyler over at Definitely Casual PCs. Check out his channel by the same name. Big thanks for the soundbite of the quote there. So now the YouTube gods will have mercy on me since I did not break their sacred rules. So thanks guys, check out his channel, and I'll see you in the next video.